So today I'm joined with Sandy Kaur from Sikh Forgiveness. Benji, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself, how you found Sikh Forgiveness, and what seva Sikh Forgiveness do.
So, Sikh Forgiveness is a mental health and wellbeing organisation. I'm the founder of the organisation, and it was founded just over 2 years ago now. It was kind of a journey alongside my own Sikhi journey, but also alongside a path that I was figuring out for myself, I think, around where I wanted my future to be. So I think I fell into mental health on the basis of a lots of things that were happening within my environment. I think there was a change in losing friends and family and work and studies. I do a lot of things for personal development. And within the community, it was just never something that we talked about. It was just carry on, you can do this. We don't know what stress is or what anxiety or depression or anything like that is. You just carry on. And when I was working, I work in a very corporate industry, and well-being and mental health is quite key because of your productive modes that you need to be in to be able to deliver the high level of work performance that you need to. So things like team building and understanding your physical and mental health was quite important, but it was never something that we talked about within family households. So I was open to learning a lot more within my workplace, but never had the opportunities to do it on a personal ground. I took the personal step to learn more around mental health through mental health training and taking part in a lot of conferences and seeking out what was available for our community, especially in mental health. So when Sikh Forgiveness was founded, I was on my mental health journey trying to figure out, where does South Asian individuals fit? Do they have a voice in a room where mental health is discussed? And why is it such a taboo topic? And I think that's where forgiveness came into it. One of the things that I learned over the past 2 to 3 years was within us all, there is an element of Waheguru. There's an element of God or the belief of the higher power that you have in either the universe or a God or something that keeps you going and gives you that hope and light. And most people don't learn how to forgive, whether they want to forgive themselves or whether they want to forgive other people. They just haven't understood why forgiveness is so important to your physical and mental health. And I think within cultures, it's a baggage that people hold on to. And you hear so many stories and you hear so many things that have happened where forgiveness hasn't been an option and people's health has deteriorated. And that's why I wanted to keep it humble. And I find forgiveness as a way of being humble. And to begin with when Sikh Forgiveness was found, it was mainly based on the forgiveness element. But as I was learning more about Sikhi, it was actually that's what we do. We are within Sikhi, we are content human beings. We want to help and serve humanity. And within that includes forgiveness. So that's why Sikh Forgiveness was founded, and that's how the name came about. It was, what's really important to me, what's my relationship with Sikhi and with my guru, and how can I support others in doing that. So once the foundations for Sikh Forgiveness was made, it was looking on the broader scale of, as a Sikh, we are here to help and serve everyone. We don't just serve our community or Sikhs or Indians or South Asians or anything that anyone would assume we would help. We help everyone, everything that's living, whether it's plants, whether it's animals. And it's important for us to do that because they're a way of life. They also have an element to bring to this world. And without those elements, the world wouldn't work. So yeah, it was the preservation of life really, and that's how Sikhi has really impacted the way Sikh forgiveness works, is because as individuals who have struggled with poor mental health, when we see a light at the end of the tunnel, our main focus is to help another person, is to try and support someone in not feeling like they had felt. And that's very much a ripple effect. You will see that across so many organizations, so many individuals, celebrities, motivational speakers, TED Talks or presentations. Everyone is sharing a part of their journey which has inspired another. By only voicing your journey can you impact somebody else's. And it's the same with our gurus. We learn about Sikhi, and even if you're a baptized Sikh, you're still learning. Every day you are learning something new, whether it's from our ancestors or whether it's from the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. There isn't anything that we haven't thought about, and we're a very new religion, so we're still continuously learning about where our voice needs to be, what we should be standing up for. What does Sikhi mean to us? What does it mean to others? Why we need to be able to have a space. And this is why it was important to incorporate that, because as I mentioned earlier, was going into these conferences and going into these meetings, understanding and learning about mental health. I was one of the very few people, or even the only person, who was from a ethnic background. So there was never a voice for a Sikh. There was never a voice for someone from the South Asian community or even from the BAME community. And this is where mental health needs to be talked about, because it's within us all. It's not something that is developed. It's there from birth. When a child is born, trying to protect them and teach them how to walk and their environment and the things that are around them, the atmosphere, sounds, their sensories, it's all linked to their mental health as well. So if a child was, say, involved in an accident or, had broken their arm or something like that, that's a potential trauma that they'll have as they grow older. But no one ever actually talks about the mental health side of it. It's always the physical healing. It's never the mental healing.
Is that a problem that you believe is cultural, or is that like something
that's across board? That is across board. I think over the years we have developed in the mental health industry in general. There is a lot of talk around mental health being a conversation amongst workplaces or schools, but if we take it to a community aspect, mental health isn't talked about at all.
Yeah, this is why I find what you're doing and what your organization is doing really interesting, because as you said, like, yeah, it's a problem across board, but especially within our community, it's like there's a silence when it comes to talking about mental health issues, talking about depression, anxiety. And in terms of Sikh forgiveness, what do you set out to achieve? And I've also seen there's quite a few people that work within the organization, right?
Yeah, so across board on the Sikh Forgiveness team, we have volunteers across the UK, and each individual volunteer is from an ethnic minority or an ethnic background. The reasoning behind that is because we all on the same stage have experienced some form of poor mental health, on the basis from a community aspect where it's not spoken about. And that's because, one, there is very limited resources in ethnic communities where mental health is translated or talked about, but also because it's seen as a shameful topic or shameful to accept. And I think that's mainly due to how our ancestors have perceived mental health to be. And that's very much down to society as well, from the Western world, of where there was institutions and people were isolated and victimized for being different or not understanding what mental health was, and that was because the lack of education was there. But that education continues to be a struggle because communities don't talk about it, because people don't want to talk about anxiety, they don't want to talk about stress, they don't want to talk about low moods or depression, because they've experienced a harder life physically than potentially emotionally. And I think we may be a generation where we're experiencing a struggle emotionally than we would have physically. Something like the partition, that's an emotional trauma and a physical trauma, because people physically were there and subjected to violence and abuse. Whereas now we've carried that trauma down from our ancestors, from our grandparents and parents. So we not only carry that trauma from a physical abuse or a physical trauma, but we also carry the pressure and expectations of they've had a harder life than we have. We should be grateful for having a roof over our head and food to eat and water, and as what we would say, the basics. But our brains are now experiencing changes that our ancestors weren't exposed to.
Mm.
And what I mean in that is we're experiencing the additional expectation or pressure of being professional and academic individuals, as well as running a household,
Mm.
as well as being a not the perfect, but a good Sikh or a good human being.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think maybe back in the day, the main focus for many families was get your education, get a job, have a family, and focus on
Mm.
your family.
Mm.
There was the very few people who went out and sought their own dreams and built a business and had the life that they dreamed of.
Mm.
Whereas now everybody wants to have that. Everybody wants to follow their dreams, but still have their family, still want to have their academic achievements, but more. And we're continuously growing in that sense where even as siblings or aunties and uncles, we are encouraging the younger generation to do the same. So we're encouraging the generation to learn more or listen to podcasts and motivational talks and see what the world has to offer, as in organizations that are helping and what kind of courses and elements the university is bringing to you. And because we've had that open possibility to try and learn these new aspects of life, that's an additional expectation, additional pressure that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, I
So
was
we
about
not
to
only
say,
carry
yeah,
everything else that our parents want from us, we carry our own expectations.
yeah, I was about to say, like what you were saying, it makes sense. There is this added pressure now on the heads of like our generation to do a lot more, mainly because we've also seen the struggle of our parents and our grandparents, and on one end it's like we don't want to struggle the way that they did, but also we want to take away their struggles now that we can. And it's that added pressure on top of like we have the ability to take that pressure away from them, but then it falls on our head. And that's where a lot of, I would say, book strives from, because it's that always wanting more for ourselves and the people around us, that we kind of put ourselves in a position of where we're, I wouldn't say ungrateful, but it's just the always wanting more that gets us into positions where we're like struggling to carry it all, because it's like like you said, we're carrying the trauma of our ancestors as well.
Yeah, and I think what it is it's a natural response what as humans that we have is we as within Sikhi we practice contentment, but sometimes we get led astray to that wanting more. And that's because of the environments that we're a part of. But also, we have to acknowledge and we have to accept with with kindness, that it's okay to want to be able to achieve more, but also why are you achieving more? Is it necessary to put your mental health and physical health at the risk of wanting to achieve more? And I think that's where we fall with our mental health, is once we achieve the university degree or find the perfect job and then settle down, it's okay, can we cope with having a family and looking after our own family? And it's a lot to take on our plates as well. It's, you're taking on a whole new family, you're taking on a new step in your journey. Even as a student of Sikhi, you're learning from what is around you and from the people around you. And it's grounding yourself back to, I am a human being. There is only so much that I can do. And with mental health, I mean, especially within the Sikh community, there is very limited conversations, especially in communities where individuals get together, that have the openness to talk about their dog anymore. And I think people used to do that a long time ago. I mean, if I was to take it back to my childhood, you know, you had family round every weekend, you'd have a cup of tea and a samosa, and you'd talk and you'd play, and people would talk about their dog and their sock and share everything. Whereas now people have kind of lost that element of community, because of the fear of what people are going to say if they find out that I'm struggling or I'm not doing so well. And it brings it back to, lokiki genge. There's that expectation of, oh, I must hide what I'm truly going through. And that filters on to mental health. You're holding on to an additional emotion and not sharing it with anyone. Now, what we say with Sikh Forgiveness is there is always an opportunity to share what you're going through, and it doesn't necessarily have to be with family. There are so many resources, especially when some of the things that we do with Sikh Forgiveness is understanding what someone is going through and signposting them, or understanding whether they need to have counseling or talking to a medical professional. But it's bridging that gap between someone being alone and someone speaking to a professional with what they're struggling with. And without raising the awareness around mental health within the community, that's not going to happen. If we don't go into Gurdwara Sahibs, if we don't go into community groups or support groups, or do talks and podcasts like this, people are not going to know that there's organizations and communities that represent them. And that makes such a massive difference. When you see someone who looks like you, that's a comfort that they can talk to someone who isn't going to judge them for being different. And that's what Sikh Forgiveness is mainly about. It's giving that one person the comfort of knowing that I am like them too, that I am a young woman from a ethnic background who has similarly experienced some struggles that they may have experienced, but I'm here to support them without any judgment and to ensure that they live or find contentment in life. And our aim is preservation of life. We've lost so many people due to suicides or isolation or other poor mental health illnesses, that something as simple as talking to someone can make all the difference.
And is that what Sikh Forgiveness set out to achieve? Like, what sort of seva do you do to kind of help encourage this conversation? I know you said that you also do podcasts. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have a array of projects and workshop that Sikh Forgiveness does. So initially when we started out, we were going into Gurdwara Sahibs, organisations, charities, and talking to the community as well as workspaces around what mental health was. So that's face-to-face workshops. Due to COVID, we moved those to online. So on a regular basis, we've held mixed groups, men and women's groups, where people can openly talk about mental health struggles that they're going through, but also learn. That's one of the other key things that we do, is we don't just talk about taboo subjects. We also provide support in how they can seek advice with what they are going through. So that could be anything to do with financial struggles or relationships or studies. We also have provided self-care and mental health workshops for universities. I think we've provided them for at least 10 universities across the UK. Podcast, as we mentioned, we do the podcasts, but we've also provided mental health training to array of volunteers across the UK. We also did mental health first aid training for Guru Nanak Prakash Gurdwara in Coventry. So they currently have 16 sevadars who are mental health first aid trained, who provide a seva to the Sangat and giving them support around mental health and how to address the conversation in a safe environment. And that was another thing that we found that the community was struggling with, is people felt they were backing away from Sikhi because they were not being heard and they were not being understood. And it was a generic answer to what they were going through, as in, if you do part, it will be okay. But alongside doing your nitnims and learning about Sikhi, or if that's the faith you follow, other coping mechanisms are required. And depending on the severity of your mental health struggle, is you are going to require professional help, whether it's from a GP or from an organization or a community group, a therapist. You're going to have like a bag full of coping mechanisms to help you with poor mental health, or even just managing day to day. As we mentioned, we have a lot of things that we have taken on, from expectations of families and those around us, but also our own expectations, and we need a space to be able to air those. And therapy is also a taboo topic. No one ever wants to talk about that they go to therapy, but it's absolutely valid for anybody to go to therapy. And I recommend it to everyone because it's a space for you. It's a space for you to talk about what you want to talk about without any judgments. And we support our service users in finding the right therapist for them. And it is vital to find the right therapist, because you're going to build a connection with that individual. And that connection can last up to 6 sessions or 1 session or however many you feel that you need. But it's a space where you're going to be sharing potentially incredibly personal situations, but it's your time and it's needed, because we hold on to that baggage. The more negativity we release, the more positivity we can incorporate. And one of the things a very, very wise person said to me was, you only experience dukh when you've experienced sukh. So in translation is, you only really truly experience unhappiness when you've been happy. And I live by that, because if you never experience happiness, how would you know what unhappiness is?
When someone says something to you and you just sit there and you're just like, oh, and it makes so much sense.
This is one of the...
My mind is blown.
and this is what I mean, is in, mental health is within us from birth. When a child is crying, they don't know what that emotion is until they're at an age of, say, 1 to 2 year old, where they have a fall and it's hurt them, or they've had a graze. They know what that pain is because they've never had that before. And that's when your mental health is beginning, your adaptation to life and learning what's around you. So if you're surrounded by constant arguments, then that's something that you're used to. If you're surrounded by happiness or things that make you laugh, and you have joy, then that's what you've lived by. But as soon as that's taken away, then you're sad. So you'll see those expressions on a child, but you also see them on an adult. Like, if I bring it back to the sports person scenario, when they win a race, they're elated because all that hard work has paid off. But if they hadn't, or if they lose or come in the top 5 instead of the top 3, they go through a huge process of, okay, how do I come out of this? How do I build myself back up? And that's with everything in life, I think. Especially within South Asian communities, we're kind of brought up to understand that our path in life is to be financially stable and to build our own family. And sometimes that doesn't work out. We don't always find the perfect job or find the perfect partner, or get married or have a family, or it's not at the same age as somebody else, or you decide to take a gap year from university because you're really struggling with things that have happened at home. And that's very common. I mean, take COVID as a prime example. How many students have had to work from home? And that's impacted their mental health massively because they haven't had that human interaction. They haven't had that space to be able to go to the library and just study, or put their headphones on and be out of a home space. And that's so important for a student. I mean, I'm a student, and my house is my library, my workplace, and my study group. That's not healthy.
I can
No,
relate.
you're a
It just
student as
becomes,
well.
yeah, it becomes, you do everything within the same 4 walls. And I think even at like the second lockdown that we've had, I think that's when it really hit, because at that point everyone's thinking everything's going to go back to normal, and then it's not, and you're in lockdown again, and this time you're doing everything in the same space. You're communicating with the same people, and sometimes online seminars and lectures, they're not as helpful because you can't have that interaction with your peers as much as they say you can talk within the sessions. No one really talks in seminars and lectures because there's that fear of, like, you can't have the private one-on-one conversation with your best mate that goes to a seminar with you, because everyone's gonna hear it. So it does
Yeah.
have an impact on, like, how you communicate with people around you, and then you are communicating with the same people for the month or 2 months, however long you've been stuck in that situation. And it's the same with adults as well, like parents working from home, who, they're them going out and going to work was their kind of escape from home life, but now they're doing everything at home.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is over the years we've built those habits of, we have to get up an extra half an hour earlier or an extra hour earlier because I've got to travel to work or travel to uni. And as you said, you haven't had the chance to sit next to your best friend or walk to your best friend or your to your seminars. You haven't been able to, meet at the coffee shop and grab a coffee before going to your lecture and having a conversation. You're having that personal time, that one-to-one connection and community conversation, whereas you're not having that at home anymore. And you're not having to take the physical actions of some people are not having the same actions of getting up and getting dressed for work or getting dressed for their uni lectures. You're sometimes you're still in your pajamas because you don't have to have the camera on. And I think, to begin with, as you said, the first lockdown, it was great because it was like I can save so much time. But now a lot of people experience the anxiety of, how am I going to be able to manage? How am I going to wake up that extra hour? How am I going to get my kids to ready for school or manage everything, as well as getting back into a new work routine or new uni routine? And there's going to be new routines put in place everywhere with the testing systems and new projects that will be open and not be open. And these are all things that no one else has had to learn for. Our ancestors, our parents have never experienced COVID. So we're a generation of having to provide that information to them. And I think one of the other things that was very new at the beginning of lockdown was trying to explain to parents and grandparents that you can't go out, it's not safe, especially as elders as well. Trying to explain to them and saying, you're not allowed to go out. And the response is, but I'm older than you. You have to
Yeah,
listen to me, not.
that's so true. Yeah, my granddad is always like before first lockdown, he's always active, always up in the morning, going for a walk. Both of my granddads are the same, and trying to explain to your granddads that you can't go out because it's not safe for you. It's kind of like them. No one's ever told the elders what to do, so they kind of like
Yeah,
taken aback. They're kind of like, oh, no, I've done. And when you argue with your parent and your parents like, no, but I know this, I've done this for longer than you, but you're kind of it's like having a conversation with a brick wall at that point, because you're like, no, you're trying to make them understand, but it's difficult for them to process because they've never experienced it before. And it goes back to what you said right at the beginning of this podcast about change and how change impacts the way people think and feel and people's emotions, because everyone has experienced some sort of change, and at some points that fills people with anxiety. I know for myself, like, any change whatsoever, just it kind of creeps me out. You don't want to experience change because it's just that something new, and that something new is what
mm,
makes everyone anxious.
exactly. And it's really difficult because as second generation or third generation individuals from an ethnic community, we're having to be the middle person. We're the translator who has learned what is going on in the world, but we also have to uphold being the child or the sibling or the grandchild for our families. And from their perspective is, we've gone through a lot more than you have. We've gone through, as I mentioned before, we've gone through the partition, we've gone through moving countries, we've gone from losing um losing families and adapting to a Western world. You guys, for us, it would be, you guys have only adapted to a language or going to school or waking up at a different time. From their comparison is, they've gone through a lot more physically and emotionally compared to what we're going through now, which is COVID. And it's also them understanding the changes we've had to make when it's come to things like losing someone. you know Routines or rituals or traditions that cultures have with regards to weddings or funerals, they've had to change massively to keep people safe. And it's not an easy conversation, trying to sit down with your parent or your grandparents and say, look, you can't go to this because it's not safe for you. It's really traumatic, not just for yourself as a person who's trying to explain it, but also trying to support your family member, an elder as well, that we're trying to keep you safe, but we understand that it's a difficult time. When truly you don't really know what someone is going through. what level of grief, what level of trauma, what level of poor mental health they're actually going through, unless they verbalize or communicate that with you. But if they've never heard of mental health, they're not going to openly share that, because they have a persona of they have to be a parent, they have to be the strong one in the family, they have to be the one who carries the grounds for everyone that lives in that house. There's no level of anyone saying to them, actually, it's okay if you want to cry. I've personally seen a lot of people around me change since working in mental health, which has been really good to actually witness.
Something that you spoke about briefly was the lack of discussion and the lack of communicating these issues. So as a kind of starting point, why is discussing our mental health problems and the trauma that we go through and the doc that we go through, why is that so important? But also, what impact can having these open discussions have on individuals, but also our community, our sangat?
It's important to give your mental health a voice, because you're releasing a duck or a pain that you've been holding on to, and that weighs you down. So sometimes we go through something in life that we've never experienced before, and we don't know how to deal with it. And the only way most people would deal with it is to pretend it's never happened, or suppress the feeling, hide their emotion, and carry on as though nothing has ever happened. But ultimately, that is just level one of what you're going through. And say in a year's time, something else happens, and you realize that you've suppressed that first feeling, so you do it again. And eventually, what you do is you continue building these blocks of pain and struggles, and there will come a point where you just won't be able to manage, and a mental breakdown can impact your whole entire life, where because you're holding on to so many struggles, that your physical health will ultimately be impacted as well. So you can experience things like high blood pressure, weight loss, or increased, you can gain loads of weight, you can lose hair, you can develop a mental health condition. But what we also don't talk about, or what we don't really take a look into as well, is sometimes mental health illnesses can be genetic. So if a family member has had depression, or an eating disorder, or psychosis, or anything along the spectrum of a mental health condition, it can be passed down through your DNA. And because we don't have the conversations around mental health, we don't have that education, we never really understand what someone is going through unless that communication is there. And it's things like things that we're exposed to already, especially with the Punjabi community as well, is mental health struggles with addiction. So alcohol and drugs is very, very big within our community, not just in the UK as well, in India and other countries. And these are all impacted by our environments, our communities, our upbringings. So if we didn't voice the conversations around mental health, then we're adding to the stigma of it being a taboo. If we talked about mental health as much as we did physical health, it wouldn't be a taboo. It wouldn't be something that you hide from, or feel that you need to hide it, or feel shameful about. Like if we had a conversation around physical health, there would be a list of things people would suggest: go to the gym, or try a new diet, or go for a walk, or do yoga, meditate, all these things that are available for physical health. But when it comes to mental health, it's not just exercise that can help you. You know, what we forget is that we seem to think that one pill can fix everything, but it can't. Even with your physical health, is a bag full of supports that you need. I think I mentioned this before, is you need a support network. You need to be surrounded by people who know how to support you if you're struggling with poor mental health. You need to have friends, a community, a therapist, if that's what you need, or something that you need to have as a space to air your poor mental health. Sometimes you require medication, but until you don't make that step by talking about your mental health, you're not going to be able to find coping mechanisms. And this is why it was important for, especially when Sikh Forgiveness was founded, was to go into communities where people wouldn't expect mental health to be spoken about. So it was going into Gurdwara Sahibs and standing there in front of everybody and saying that we need to have a conversation around mental health, because our grandparents and our parents are going to be going through physical struggles like dementia, Alzheimer's, cancer, and we haven't really understood how to deal with supporting someone with a physical health condition. And that ultimately impacts not just their mental health, but ours as well. And it brings it back to there being a ripple effect of, okay, it's going to impact our mental health. Their health is going to deteriorate, which means that we're going to have to take on a lot more responsibilities, which means going to places that you wouldn't have expected to have gone, and on the basis of going to like doctors and hospital appointments and having conversations with medical professionals about what needs to happen next, or what's the best cure or treatment, and you're never really geared up for these conversations. So if you haven't been able to address your own mental health struggles, it begins to grow on your building blocks. So where Sikh Forgiveness comes into mental health is we want to start the conversation of mental health in communities amongst the day-to-day person and the professionals within our sangat, and say, okay, do you talk about mental health? Because the conversation has to begin somewhere. And only then will the education and the learning grow amongst families and friends. And only then will it become a normal conversation as well. So it's passing the barriers of the how are you question. It's really wanting to know how someone is feeling and not just asking them how they are because it's polite. And as individuals, we've got a lot of learning to do around mental health. It's not just about asking someone how they are. You've got to be geared and ready to acknowledge that you can't hold any judgments against them. You can't criticize what they are struggling with. You just have to be open and listen without any expectations to hold to them. And I think that's, as a community, that's what we've kind of grown up with, is we had a harder life than you did. You've had it easy. There's no comparison in mental health. Everybody's impacted differently. So I think that's why it's important for us to communicate that, because we will be able to normalize the mental health conversation for generations to come. So it's like you and me having this conversation. Your podcast is going to be listened to, say, a array of people who are similar to your age, and they're going to feel the comfort of, actually, do you know what? There's a Sikh organization talking about mental health, and maybe I can talk to them. Maybe they might be able to help me with something that I'm going through. And that could be due to anything. That could be a struggle with university work, or it could be to do with home life. And we have to still accept that even as a young girl, 16, 17, early 20s, I was probably going through similar things that you guys are going through now, which is, okay, what are my parents are going to expect of me after I finished uni, or what have I been doing at uni all this time, or studying all this time? Who am I talking to? And students still experience that now. So academically we've grown, but culturally and traditionally, our mindsets haven't changed that much. And that's where our mental health is deteriorating, is because we don't have those conversations, and we're still binded by how society expects us to be. One of the shocking things that I found was meeting young girls like yourself, where they were still being checked up on and still being called and still being asked 10, 100 million questions about who they were talking to. And it was just so surreal. And one of the funny things that I came across was I held a workshop in Birmingham, and we had a group of older women join. I think they were in their late 50s and 60s, and they were just so shocked that young women like myself and my team were still battling the questions that they had. And you're looking at least a 40-year age gap. So in 40 years, they were still, or we are still, experiencing the same questions, the same conversations with families.
Some things don't change.
Yeah. And that's the thing, that's the scary thing. Yeah.
But that's like what you said, you know, it comes down to that lack of conversation and that lack of discussion, because these are situations that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if there was more conversation back in the day about how much of an issue this is, I mean, we wouldn't know, but you can only imagine that it would be so different for people nowadays who maybe wouldn't have had to experience it, or even if they did experience it, they would know how to go about it in a way that would stop them from becoming as upset by it or letting it impact them in such a negative way, because there would have been outlets or sources that they could refer to that could help them out a lot more. But again, we don't have enough conversation, so it's very hard for them to face it in an as positive way as they could potentially.
Yeah, and I think as individuals and communities, we have to be open to, we may not want to talk to family members. You know, there are families out there and people out there who are having the mental health conversation within their families, within their households or communities, but they don't necessarily want to speak to them because of fear of criticism and judgment. But this is where our minds should be a little bit more open to the basis of, okay, if you don't want to talk to me, maybe I can find somebody who you'd feel comfortable talking to. And it brings it back to, you know, the preservation of life, the contentment of someone being able to live happily without any dukh or struggles going forward. We continuously celebrate our Guru Sahibs for what they have done for Sikhi, but for everyone in their path that they had met. You know, from providing water to our enemies or people that they've been betrayed, or, you know, they sacrificed lives for humanity. They never held any grudges. They never held any pain towards that person to say,
no
you
hatred in
did
their
this
heart.
to me. That's the right word. Hatred. They never held any hatred towards people to say, I'm never going to help you because this is what you did to me. And this is where forgiveness comes from. For me, if there is an element of light from Maharaji or from the higher power or the universe, whatever an individual believes in, then ultimately there's an element that you're not forgiving. Guru Sahib forgives everything if you accept or learn from your mistakes or learn from the things that you feel may have not been right or wrong. And within you, there is that element of Maharaji. So therefore, you're not forgiving Maharaji. We are the children. We are learning. But if we don't grow, if we don't adapt to providing a higher seva to humanity, then how are we going to preserve life? You know, we want people to be happy, we want people to be content, we want people to live a peaceful life. But if we don't support them, if we're not there for them, if we don't openly open our hearts to them and give them space to understand that, okay, I'm here for you, then how are they ever going to talk to someone? And as parents or as siblings, you know, we don't want to share things with our family members because we have that fear of, not just fear, but we have that expectation of they're not going to understand, they don't know what I'm going through, or they're just going to judge me. And that's an absolute okay feeling to have, but that doesn't mean you can't talk to somebody else. And as a friend or someone who's supporting another person with poor mental health, they should always be open to the idea of saying, okay, I understand you may not feel comfortable talking to me, but can we try speaking to somebody else? I've heard of this organization, or we can go to the GP and see if they can help you, what is going on, or do you need a counselor, or just talk to me, don't feel afraid. And you can provide that coping mechanism for someone who is struggling, and that's where you're able to support someone and begin the conversation around mental health. Because realistically, there isn't anybody in the world who hasn't experienced poor mental health. They either don't realize that they're struggling or that they're being impacted by mental health, or they choose to ignore it.
I want to add to what you said before as well about Guru Sahib and Dukh. And I want to make it very clear that as a human, as you said, everyone goes through a different type of dukh. We can look at our Guru Sahibs and we can see from the Sakis that we read and the Sakis that we hear about as kids or growing up, or the ones that you look into, our Gurus had also faced their fair share of dukh, but it was the outlook that they had on that dukh. We look at the Shahidi of Guru Arjan Dev Ji, and we look at how Guru Sahib had dealt with that dukh at the time by just accepting it as hukum. As individuals, even as people of my age, and like you said, a lot of people listening are around my age, I think it's very easy to get caught up in the fact that there needs to be a reason why. Of why am I going through it? Why am I facing this dukh? Why me? That's the big question. Why me? And I think that again is another reason why people go down the route of just not talking about their problems, but at the same time just not feeling but thinking that they deserve that pain. And then that adds to it as well. And like you said, talking to people and being there for your friend who is going through mental health, experiencing poor mental health, just being so okay with helping them out in a way that they might not talk to you, they're not comfortable talking to you, but giving them other sources is really important. And that leads on to my next question for you, which is how can we make it so that people are comfortable talking about their mental health?
Start with the conversation of mental health. Make yourself self-aware of what you're going through. As in, if we were to use an example of when you're at university, there's so many things that you have to take into consideration: deadlines, turning up to your lectures, making sure that you hit your deadlines, making sure that you are prepped for your exams, and even passing your exams. Understanding your emotions is the first step, because if you don't accept or acknowledge that you're struggling, you're not going to be able to seek support. But as an outsider for somebody else, it's being aware of how a person is acting, their behaviors, the way they are speaking or talking via messages or via emails, or has their routine changed? If you regularly talk to a person, you're going to notice changes in their behaviors more than someone who talks to them every 2 to 3 months. Our parents notice when things aren't right with us because they see us or talk to us every day. But if we don't acknowledge that we're struggling, we're not going to ask for help. So ultimately, it's having enough space and communications to acknowledge that poor mental health is okay and it happens, but that doesn't mean you won't get through it. You just need to ask for help, and help is available everywhere possible. So if you're working, your workplace will have a mental health program or a well-being program that you can speak to or understand or get information from. If you're at university, they have their own counselling hubs or student student minds or nightlines that you can contact to speak to. If you're in a community, then you can find a lot of Gurdwara Sahibs do programs around well-being, where they'll have a professional on hand. You can always seek out that professional and ask them. There's a lot of platforms out there now, like Sikh Forgiveness, where you can contact and understand what mental health is, whether it's impacting us, impacting you, impacting someone around you. If you've noticed things where you're not sure what to do, NHS website has a library of resources. And if it's something to do with a language barrier, Sikh Forgiveness released a book last November called Mental Health Ki Hundi Hai. And it's a mental health book which has been translated from English to Punjabi. And within this book, there's 15 mental health disorders where, say, myself and my grandparents can have that conversation, because each topic has the English version as well as the Punjabi context within that book. So it basically means that I can sit down with somebody and say, are you struggling with anything? Is mental health, do you know what mental health is? And being able to go into Gurdwara Sahibs and meet elder people and communities and charities who are supporting individuals whose main language is Punjabi, and support them into getting mental health support. And within this book, there's support services, numbers, even on an international basis as well, where you can contact somebody if you're in Canada or America or in India. There are resources within there where you can contact somebody who might be able to support you if you're struggling. But the whole point of this resource was to begin that first stepping stone of a conversation around mental health, because we just haven't had those conversations to begin with. So it's important for us to start somewhere, but it's got to start with you. So you're either a person supporting another with poor mental health, or you're a person with poor mental health who wants support. Either way, you're looking for someone to help you and someone to understand. And that all starts with expressing what you're going through. And resources like Mental Health Ki Hundi Hai, resources like support groups or workshops, podcasts, talks, presentations are all potential groups where you can ask someone for help. If you are struggling with poor mental health or have experienced any forms of low moods or new anxieties and you're not quite sure who to talk to, do speak to someone that you trust. It could be a family member, it could be your GP, it could be an organization like Sikh Forgiveness, but do talk to someone. We want to help you. We are here to support you. And we value you as a person in this world. So if there's anything that you are struggling with and feel that you need someone to talk to, then do reach out for support. You can find Seek Forgiveness on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We also have a website, which is www.sickforgiveness.com. And we also have our very own podcasts as well, which are in English, but also podcasts which are available in Punjabi and Urdu. So do check them out. We really hope you enjoyed listening to us today. And thank you, Benji, for having us on. And we really appreciate it. And
No,
we look
thank
forward
you.
to hearing this soon.
No, thank you so much, Benji, for coming and talking about all of these different things. It will be so helpful to a lot of people, especially as you said. You know, my target audience, or the audience that normally listen to these podcasts, are around early 20s to mid 20s, and I get several messages about how, as a Sikh, we can face duk, and a lot of the times the answers that I have will never be as near to helpful as the answers that you or anyone that works with you at your organization would have. So I will leave all of the links to your social media and your book in the description as well, so that people can check that out. But thank you so much, Benji, for coming today.
For sure. I mean, the book is available on the Sikh Forgiveness website, but you can also purchase it via Amazon as well.